Welcome back to Specimen the Sociologist. This is your host, Jasmine Rickman. As you may know, my name rhymes with specimen, but with a J, and I am a budding sociologist who is on one simple mission. That is, to figure out the science behind our social lives and how it can be used to stabilize our social interactions. Without further ado, let's dive into today's episode, the sociology of anxiety. Per tradition, we're kicking off this episode with a spotlight. This is an opportunity to highlight independent artists or small businesses that are ready to share their gift with the world. And today's spotlight goes to my dear friend, djnayiram, a Ghanaian born cultural curator located here in Seattle, Washington. Now, I first met this snazzy fellow at a Krung Bang concert, and our little group ended up dancing the entire night away. After that, I was able to see him perform live at Monkey Loft for his When We Dance series, Cafe Beba, and even most recently at the Showbox Downtown as he opened up for Joe K's If Not Now, Then When tour. With every set, Naram shares music from his homeland Ghana and across the continent of Africa to curate a home away from home. Through the exploration of global sounds and timeless beats, Naram does what no one else can do, and that is build bridges through music. Because let's be honest, in a time of great social disconnection and overall tension, I believe that music is more than entertainment. It's a social force. If we understand music as a universal language, it has the power to communicate emotions, values, and stories without needing translation. Therefore, I think music provides a rare platform where people from different backgrounds can come together for a shared experience. And who knows, all that can come from one dance, one connection, and one conversation. And you know what? On that note of one, make sure to follow the one and only DJ Nayiram on his social media platforms to find out where he is playing next and how you can enjoy only a space that he can curate. Spotlight aside, let's dive back into the world of sociology. In today's episode, we're actually going to leverage two separate sociological theories. We'll be looking at anxiety not just as an individual experience, but as something shaped and amplified by the society we live in. To do this, we'll be drawing briefly on two key sociological perspectives: structural strain theory by Robert Merton and postmodern theory by John Francis Lyotard. These frameworks help us understand how larger social forces like cultural expectations, rapid change, and media saturation can shape our emotional worlds. We won't spend too long dissecting the theories themselves. Instead, we'll use them as a lens to set the stage. And by the end of this episode, my goal is for you to walk away with a science based perspective on anxiety, how to develop daily routines to manage healthy anxiety, and to be more physically present, even in a distracting world. Now, here's the greatest question: what is anxiety? How does it subtly present itself in our social behavior? And most importantly, what the hell can we do about it? Anxiety can be understood as a complex emotional and psychological response to perceived threats, uncertainty, or a lack of control. It often manifests as persistent worry, bodily tension, restlessness, and behavioral changes such as avoidance or hypervigilance. Now, while a certain level of anxiety is normal and even adaptive part of the human experience, chronic or disproportionate anxiety can interfere with daily functioning and overall well being. And if I could take it a step further and sprinkle sociology onto our working definition, I would argue that anxiety isn't just personal or medical, it's social. It is shaped by economic inequality, systemic oppression, and even cultural pressures to perform, succeed, and self manage. In this sense, anxiety reflects the stress of navigating a society that often demands more than it supports. However, let's sprinkle some data onto our definition. According to the National Institution of Mental Health, approximately 19.1% of US adults had an anxiety disorder in the past year. Additionally, over 31.1% of US adults experience an anxiety disorder at some time in their life, thus making this type of disorder among the most common mental illness in the US. And as a friendly reminder, when we talk about a disorder, we're not talking about weakness or something wrong with a person. a disorder simply means that the brain or body is responding in a way that causes significant distress or makes daily life harder to manage. It's a recognized health condition, just like asthma or diabetes, and it is not a reflection of someone's worth. So I just want to make sure that we gently destigmatize that word. All right? All right. Now that we understand that a good chunk of Americans wrestle with various anxiety disorders, what does the data show in regards to societal trends? Well, in recent years, anxiety prevalence in the United States has increased notably, with significant rises observed particularly among young adults. Now, women consistently report higher rates of anxiety compared to men, and socioeconomically disadvantaged populations, including those experiencing housing instabilities, they also face a heightened sense of vulnerability. Now, there are a million and one other contributing factors such as economic uncertainty, increased engagement with social media, and even latent effects of COVID-19 that are still here today. But despite the growing recognition of anxiety symptoms, disparities in access to mental health care still persist. And this results in many individuals not receiving adequate support. So, hopefully, I'm not saying this podcast is a supplement to your professional needs for anxiety, but perhaps it can give you a new perspective to manage it in a healthier way. Anywho, to huddle, let's dive into the sociological theories that's going to kind of frame today's podcast. The first is structural strain theory, which argues that anxiety can be rooted in the tension between societal expectations and accessible opportunities. Societies often promote culturally valued goals such as wealth, success, stability, and beauty, but access to the legitimate means of achieving these goals is unequally distributed. When individuals are expected to quote unquote achieve but lack the resources to do so, they experience strain. Now, this strain doesn't produce deviant behavior as Merton originally explored. It can also manifest as chronic psychological pressure. Feelings of inadequacy, fear of failure, and social comparison can intensify, ultimately contributing to heightened anxiety. For example, a young adult constantly bombarded with the messages of financial success and career achievement may experience anxiety if they lack the resources or the opportunities to meet those ideals. Our second theory is the postmodern theory, which views contemporary society as fragmented, rapidly evolving, and saturated with competing narratives, aka social media. Now, in such a world, individuals often face uncertainty about their identity, belonging, and truth. Lyotard describes this as an incredulity toward meta narratives, meaning that the grand, stable stories that once gave society a shared sense of purpose have all eroded. And as a result, people must constantly construct and reconstruct their sense of self in a fast changing environment shaped by technology, media, and globalization. Now, this perpetual instability can foster anxiety as individuals are forced to navigate shifting expectations and ambiguous social norms. Like, for example, someone navigating online spaces might feel pressure to curate their identity across multiple platforms, never quite certain of who they are or where they fit, and this can intensify feelings of social and existential anxiety. Now that we've explored the data, the trends, and the sociology behind anxiety, let's talk a little bit about how it can subtly influence our daily behaviors, our relationships, and even the way that our community functions. Because again, anxiety is not always loud or obvious. In fact, it often shows up in quiet, almost invisible ways. You might notice someone skipping social events or meetings, gently steering clear of situations that feel overwhelming or uncertain. And other times, anxiety pushes people towards over preparation or perfectionism, like spending hours color coding calendars or creating spreadsheets for every possible job application. Like my friends and I, we call this productive procrastination. But in complete honesty, it is often anxiety wearing a disguise, which is trying to create control in an uncertain situation. In conversations, anxiety might sound like speaking a little faster than usual, avoiding eye contact, or seeming distracted. It can lead to replaying interactions over and over in your head, worrying about how you came across or fearing judgment. It can make you seek reassurance, asking for a second, a third, or even a fourth opinion. And while it's not like wrong to like seek out validation or get that additional support, if you're constantly worried about making the wrong decision, that is unhealthy. And these behaviors, while they might seem small or even culturally acceptable, they often reveal how anxiety quietly shapes how people move through their social worlds, often creating a cycle that makes everyday interactions even more challenging. And actually, let me throw one more cheeky example in here because this one is actually a big one. And that is, anxiety can also shape how we use and engage with media, especially social media. I mean, think about the compulsive checking, doom scrolling, comparing yourself to others, or seeking validation through likes and comments. Sometimes we use media to quote unquote escape stress, whether that's binge watching to calm down. But over time, these habits can actually deepen feelings of anxiety. And researchers even have a name for this. It's called the quote unquote feedback loop of anxiety. That's when personal emotional states drive our engagement with platforms, and the platforms themselves are designed to reinforce and amplify those emotions. In other words, anxiety stops being just a personal experience, but it becomes a social and economic engine that companies profit from. And let's be clear, users are not weak or addicted in some moral sense. These platforms are strategically engineered to tap into basic human psychology, things like fear, uncertainty, and our need to belong. And with all that being said, pardon my French, but I think that's straight bullcrap. And with that being said, social media should be a tool to help cultivate community, not compensate for the lack of it. And that idea brings us perfectly to the next part of our conversation, which is practical solutions for managing your anxiety, or as I would like to call it, specimen solutions. Get it? Because specimen sociologist. Anywho, dad joke aside. As I mentioned earlier, my mother's greatest advice to me is that it's not good enough to inform a person about a social problem without giving them tools of application. So, here are a few suggestions that I have to help you manage your anxiety in a healthy manner. The first suggestion is actually a perspective, and that is to view disruptions as opportunities to be present. Now, when it comes to anxiety, quote unquote disruption does not mean chaos or destruction. It means that there is a general interruption of one's patterns, cycles, or feedback loops that keep anxiety alive, whether that be constant overthinking, avoidance, and anxious behavior. And I know, it seems counterintuitive to embrace disruption when talking about anxiety, but it is truly the greatest gift that brings you back to reality. Take, for example, post grad. If things did not hit the fan for your girl, this podcast would not exist, and we would not have the motto, how can science stabilize our social interactions? Right? Like, your girl had to go through some unstable situations to be like, okay, what can we do about it? But it was through that unwarranted disruption that I found a greater capacity to serve others. And that's by helping them unpack the science behind their social lives. Because you may not see it on the surface, but people are wrestling with hidden anxiety, loneliness, low self esteem, or even unforgiveness. So if I can make a 20-minute podcast to encourage you on your commute to work, well, darling, that is a job well done and a life well lived for me. And last little tidbit for this point is I have a phrase that I tell myself, which is, well, now that we're here, here we go. Like, I can only ruminate on bad information for so long before it just is, I just have to make a decision. All right, now we're off to point number two, and that is remember that anxiety is a roadmap for your personal needs. Now, we often think of anxiety only as a signal that something is wrong, but it can also act as a compass, pointing us toward what matters to us most, what we need, and where we may feel out of alignment in our lives. And if I can be completely honest, anxiety has led to making the boldest moves in my life, not because I was not anxious about having a challenging conversation or fearful of the outcome, but my desire for clarity was greater than my anxiousness. And the fabulous part is that bravery is only needed for a moment, literally for a moment. Like, I don't know how to be bold all the time, just when needed, which is a perfect transition into our third point, and that is to take risks. Now, this may seem pretty straightforward, but it's pretty sound. And it actually reminds me of a poster that was up on my wall freshman year of college. And it was a photo of John F. Kennedy, and he was smoking a big old cigar. And in the smoke, it said, "Those who dare to fail miserably can achieve greatly." So, my best advice to you is failure is inevitable. So, you might as well just give it your all. Now, point number 4 is use forgiveness as a tool to overcome anxiety. If we understand anxiety as a complex emotional and psychological response to perceived threats, uncertainty, or a lack of control, it's really easy to fall into the mindset of the shoulda, coulda, woulda, right? Like, I should have ended that relationship. I could have responded differently. I would have done things different if only I had known. Like, these are just simple examples of how past experiences can plant seeds of anxiousness that influence our daily behavior. Therefore, an indirect way to address your anxiety is to forgive yourself or the other person that disrupts the negative feedback loop and actually equips you with making present decisions. And while you can't change the past, you can change the options you have tomorrow based on the decisions that you make today. So, I know that was a whole word salad that I gave you, but hopefully you just get the overall premise that forgiveness is your best friend. And, side note, I'm going to plug myself into here. I have a podcast that views forgiveness as a social act, not as an emotional response. So go ahead, that's back in season 1. Check it out. And I believe that that will give you more tangible tools on how to, yeah, forgive yourself and those around you. And our last and final point is decenter yourself from the narrative. This is probably my favorite piece of advice because it's one that I need to apply daily. When people experience anxiety, especially social or performance related anxiety, their attention often turns sharply inward, focusing on themselves, focusing on how they're being perceived, what they might be doing wrong, or how a situation could go badly. Now, when you begin to decenter yourself from the narrative, you gently shift the focus away from yourself and back to the present moment, to the conversations or to the people around you. And, um, okay, I don't know a nice way to say this, but when you realize that everything is not about you, you become far more effective and the world becomes a lot more generous. Like, you will begin to ask people about their days. You become curious about your work instead of just being careful. You even become more honest and create opportunities for pure social engagement. By decentering yourself, you're placing yourself back into reality. And yeah, which I guess, speaking of being present, here is a personal story to help wrap today's episode up. Now, it was summer of 2021, and I had just graduated with my master's from Loyola University in New Orleans, and I was moving back to Seattle, Washington, which is my hometown. Now, after living away for 5 years, there was something inside of my heart that really wanted a new start in an old place. Because if I can be honest, I ran hard for those 5 years during undergrad and grad school, whether it was serving as student body president, volunteering, studying abroad, working through my first romantic heartbreak, or maybe a friendship breakup. Like, I was at my capacity. And the idea of coming home made me really excited just to slow down. And to help with that process, I temporarily deactivated my Instagram account. No notice, no announcement. I just smooth, cool, logged off and didn't realize that I had just tuned back into the present. And what was beautiful is that it turned into an experience that I never would have imagined. I began to catch up with my family, especially on the details that were not mentioned over the phone, right? I began to write letters to connect with childhood friends and became far more intentional with my communication, whether that be scheduling monthly phone calls with long distance friends or even writing handwritten letters. Now, if I can crank up the honesty just a little bit, Being offline also forced me to reflect on my relationships. Like, there were so many moments before that I'd just be scrolling through my feed, learning like a little bit too much about a person that I hadn't spoken to in years. Like, I really don't need to know what my sixth grade science partner is doing on a random Thursday or see a casual selfie from an old college acquaintance. And it's not because their lives are not valuable, they absolutely are, but because those updates don't match the reality of our current relationship and how often do we talk. And it's just the odd part is social media creates this hyper social environment where you know about people's lives without ever having a conversation about their life updates. And a single post can pull you back into a past version of yourself or trigger old memories and emotions that really aren't relevant anymore. Now, sometimes that nostalgia is very sweet because, again, we love a good throwback, and not all experiences are bad experiences. But it does mean that a part of your attention is living in the past instead of the present. And there's actually science behind that. Social media is built to quote unquote collapse context, meaning it erases the natural boundaries between close friends, distant acquaintances, and old contacts. Everyone's updates sit side by side, even though the relationships live in very different parts of your life. Psychologists have found that this constant exposure can overstimulate the brain, heighten social comparison, and actually increase baseline levels of anxiety. Essentially, like your mind is juggling more relationships than it's designed to hold at once. But when I logged off, something shifted. I started creating new experiences right where I was. And I built a new chapter of my life here in Seattle. And honestly, after 4 years, I have never had a stronger sense of self or deeper, more meaningful social interactions and stronger relationships. So, again, without the noise of other people's timelines, I literally had the mental space to take more leaps of faith. I launched this podcast, Specimen the Sociologist. I started pursuing my wildest dreams, having tough conversations with loved ones, and I just was not clogged down by constant stimuli or other people's lives. I was just present, as one would say. And here is what's beautiful is logging off did not make my world smaller. It made it clearer. And it revealed which relationships held real value and which ones I was kind of overvaluing out of a habit of nostalgia. And now, a few years later, I've returned to social media with a new mindset. It's no longer my social environment, but rather it's a tool to initiate connections with timeless friendships. Hype up my girls in the comments section, which, side note, if you're listening to this, Hope Clementine, I love you, girl. I love your posts, and I can't wait to hug you in the upcoming new year. Love you. Anyways, but I just promote this podcast and I send memes to my mom. Like, that is what I do on social media. Like, that's my whole life. And I also just love being a cornball. All right. So it's really cute though, is the little posts that I make, they're actually points of engagement when I see people in real life. Like, oh my God, Jasmine, I saw you. You were like dancing salsa on the pier on Puget Sound. What was going on? I'm like, child, I was dancing for free. I'll see you next Friday. We're dancing again. Like, social media should be, I don't know, just an opportunity to engage in real life interactions. Okay. Now, that being said, if you have never logged off of social media for a period of time, I highly recommend that you do it. And not just delete the app, but deactivate your account. It's so freeing, it's so nice, and the world becomes peachy. On that note, we're just going to wrap up today's episode. So, hopefully, you learned a little bit more about the sociology behind anxiety and you implement some of the specimen solutions that I offered. Now, as always, make sure to subscribe to the show, share this episode with a family member or a friend who is wrestling with or has wrestled with anxiety. And if you would like to financially sow into this podcast, there will be a link in my bio. So until next time, have a powerful day. And don't forget to follow my friend djnayiram to find the next space to shake your booty. All right. Bye, you guys.